Not
Gonna
me.
start, I'm gonna start live streaming even though we're a little bit early. Um, because got a good crowd here already.
Oh, okay.
Well, I know. Crowd is relative. Remember, it is August.
Should I start sharing?
You were sharing, weren't you?
Yeah. Let me just pull that up again. There we go.
Or were you just checking it out?
I was just making sure that it works, but it seems to work. Does that look okay to everybody?
It seems okay to me.
Looks good to me. Yeah.
Just for the live streaming. I never know if I need to log into my account. I don't think I do, but I'm just double checking. So it takes me a second. I only do this once a month, so I forget. I do like your title.
Thank you.
So
Yeah,
we
Joyce and I were kind of discussing it, and we both like this.
Joyce is so upset that she's not here to see this. She's almost at the final stages of getting rid of a house and just doing the final bits of it. But she's gonna watch the recording. So welcome to the SIFWA Indie Author Meetup. And we're lucky we have an expert today who's going to help us get judgy about our book covers. Not too judgy, I hope. You're not going to make us cry, are you?
I don't like to make people cry. I think if I've made somebody cry, I've done something wrong. So
Okay. All right. I don't mind crying. If you need somebody to cry, I'll volunteer. But it's 7:01, so
all right.
I'll let people in as we go. So feel free to start and we're good to go.
Yeah, and this is sort of a abridged, kind of more informal version of a workshop that I do. So just feel free to pop on your mic if you have a comment or a question or an opinion. I usually can't see the chat on my Zoom, so it's easier if people just like shout out. Okay. So, uh, for those of you who don't know me, which I think might be everybody, I'm a teacher, graphic designer, author, and podcaster based in Toronto, more commonly known as Toronto. I used to be a full-time graphic designer, but I decided that I liked making money more. So now I am a teacher and I just freelance, which means that I can focus on the stuff that I love, which is book design. For my own series, The Sleep of Reason, pictured here, also pictured at some point behind me. I did design the covers. I never recommend that people, including graphic designers, design their own covers, but I never take my own advice. So I'm here to give advice, not to follow it. And this is my cat, Sabo. She's really needy. Okay. So here's a little bit of my work. Top stuff is all genre, bottom stuff is a little bit of a mix. I do work for mainly indie authors these days and small press authors, but I've also worked for medium presses as well as in um, other graphic design fields. So, I've done websites and logos and all of that kind of thing, but book covers are really where my heart is at. So, just as a little bit of an icebreaker, has anybody ever either bought a book based on its cover or not bought a book based on its cover, and why? I see like a lot of heads nodding.
I'm happy to volunteer the
Yeah.
why. So if there's an element on the cover that just attracts me, I will pick it up. I mean, if it says you're gonna like this story, I will say I'm more likely to buy it for the title than the cover, but I have bought it because I like the cover. And I have not bought a book because I don't like the cover when it's like it feels wrong. It's like, a cozy mystery that looks like a science fiction dystopia or something like that. I just can't handle, my mind can't handle the clash. I'll have to like circle back a couple times if I really want to, if I've read good reviews. Anybody else want to say why they might not have or have not bought a book? Oh, we have a silent crowd.
Yeah.
If you put it in the chat, I'll read it out loud. So you can weigh in later, but Rachel, we have a quiet crowd, but they want to listen.
That's okay. But you actually raise a lot of good points, which is that we often have some element of the cover that is either saying, yes, this book is for me, or no, this book is not for me. And part of what I want to do here is to identify those elements. So I'm going to start with a case study, and I'm allowed to be snarky about this because I know for a fact the author hated this cover. It was actually, it came out around the time that we met, and he had nothing good to say about it. So what I'd like to, I know more audience participation. I'm sorry. If you guys could tell me what you think this book is about and who you think the audience is, I would love to hear it. Unless you know already. Oh, I am seeing the chat. Okay. Um, oh yeah. So mostly because I agree with the premise and the cover don't jive. It bothers me, but I can be driven away by a bad title. Yeah, for sure. So any guesses as to the genre, the audience, the
I think it's
subject?
a terrible cover.
It's a terrible cover, right?
Yeah, you said
This is why Nick and I became friends because he was complaining about this. I'm like, oh, that is a terrible cover.
literary fiction, maybe?
Okay, yeah.
Ellen is guessing poetry.
Poetry. That
Uh,
is the most common guess that I get. And
Oh,
Jen's
that's not good for poets.
Oh gosh. Hey everyone. I would guess maybe memoir where I'll go.
okay. Yeah, that's a good guess too.
Yeah.
Um, right. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about this book because I happen to love it. It's actually my one of my favorite YA books ever written. So this is fiction.
No, this is YA.
Is well, it is really dark YA. It's like a black comedy. It is about a 12-year-old boy whose father loses his mind after September 11th and kind of goes rooting through trash dumps to find the uranium that's in smoke detectors, builds a small nuclear device, puts it in a garden gnome in front of his house, and declares his house its own country. Hence the title Under My Roof, You Will Live Under My Laws. It is hilarious. And this cover does nothing to advertise the book. So even though I feel this should have been a bestseller based on the fact that it's awesome, the book cover just didn't support the marketing at all. Now, the good news is that Nick eventually got a little bit more famous and it got redesigned as part of an anthology. And there's a much better, more appropriate cover for it. So, you can have a bad cover and you can always recover it with a publisher who gets what you're doing. Or,
Rachel, could I ask, was
yes,
it a publisher decision for
yes,
that cover?
yeah.
Okay.
He didn't really know about it until the book was coming out. Um, and I mean, this is something that as an indie author, you're always thinking about because if you are working with a publisher, they're going to make that decision for you. If you're indie, the ball's in your court, you have all of the power, but also all of the responsibility, which is why I do kind of try and make it my mission to make sure that indie authors don't have bad covers. But yeah, this was a press decision, and later on he got a better press. So yeah. Um, so this might be 101 to everybody, but I want to just briefly remind everyone what a book cover is for. So a lot of the time, especially in genre, we have a character or we have a scene in mind. We have this image of what the story is, and we really want to see that represented on the cover. The problem is that perfect scene in your book only makes sense visually to somebody who has read your book. And your target audience is somebody who has not yet read your book. A, a book cover can be art. I definitely find that it scratches my creative itches, but above all else, it is marketing for your book. So it is meant to communicate a couple things: genre, audience, content. And if you're planning on doing multiple books over your life, which most of us probably are, your author brand. So there's a website called Cover Critics, which I have some disagreements with, but I'll get into that later. But their slogan is "Nothing is more expensive than a bad cover," and that much I agree with. So we'll talk a little bit about comp grids because this is a great tool. And if you are on SFWA Discord, you will, I'm sure, know about it. But if not, this is a 9 grid. Your cover goes in the middle and the other 8 squares are for your comps. So you're looking generally at mid-list books. So not the most famous bestseller, not something that nobody's ever heard of, but something kind of in between. Same genre as you that have been published in the last 5 years. So the comp grid that I made here is based on nominees for the Nebulas and the Hugos. And you can see right away that this is not a very useful grid. So you're looking at a whole bunch of different subgenres. We've got sci-fi, we got fantasy, we got horror. It's not really going to tell us a lot of useful information. It doesn't give us zero information though. These books do all kind of skew to the literary end of the genre, so they do have some commonalities, and they are quite a bit distinct from what I'd say is like the more commercial end of things. So you can learn something, but if I was doing a comp grid, I would say that these books are just too diverse to be any use at all. So let's look at a subgenre that has a little bit more consistency and a little bit more specificity that I love to both pick on and design covers for, and that is romantasy. So here's just, I looked up some current romantasy books ranging from indie to bestsellers and put them all together, and right away you can see that there's a lot of similarity. So we've got mostly dark backgrounds. We've got a lot of symbolic imagery. There's the majority are more symbols than character art, but there is, substantial character art on there. Generally speaking, dark backgrounds, light text. I'm going to make a joke about Cinzel, but if you're in this subgenre, half the time your font is Cinzel. So there is a real shared commonality. So let's toss a book in the middle of it. What do you guys think? Does it fit? Does it not fit? I'm seeing heads shaking.
I'm going to jump in and say it's too smooth. I mean, it's got a fancy font.
Yeah, it's.
Can I ask you a question about this though? Because this is something that's always, I just don't have the instinct for it or whatever. And when you had that first grid up, I was like, oh, I'm doing it wrong. I wouldn't know how to. And then you said, that wasn't useful. So I was like, oh, good. I'm not doing it completely wrong. But like here, like if I thought this was mine, would I really want to try and match these others, or would that be too matchy?
That is an excellent question. So if you are Sarah J. Maas, no, you're going to do your own thing. If you are trying to get in on Amazon recommendations, you probably would be a little bit more matchy. So it really depends on your position in the market and your brand. And I mean, this is something that, like, from an artistic perspective, hurts my soul because I want everybody's book covers to be unique and represent their book. But there is a certain compromise that you need to make aesthetically if you are going to communicate genre and audience. Now, I'll show you an alternate cover. Same book, but it fits perfectly. So I think the comp grid system is a good start. If you have a cover design, if you're thinking about it, it'll at least at like kind of a glance tell you if you're on the right track. When I do, when I teach graphic design as well, and I tell my students to just sort of squint their eyes, look at it from a distance. If they wear glasses, take off their glasses. And if everything kind of blurs together, you're probably on the right track. But that is not all. And it's also not particularly useful to tell us why this fits more than this fits. So what I'd really like to talk to you guys about is why one is communicating one thing and one is communicating another thing, why one fits in the subgenre and why it doesn't. Now, these were both published. They were both bestsellers. And what's happening here is she's a huge name and they've sort of tapped out the main audience, so they're going for another audience. And the first one, which I do actually really like a lot better, is geared more towards people like me. So this is skewing more literary. It is communicating. This is a sophisticated book for people who have sophisticated tastes, and I'm completely pretentious, so I fall for that kind of thing. Um, and it's doing it for a lot of different reasons. So one of the big ones is image style. So it's a much more sort of stylized, abstracted, minimalistic kind of image. We don't have a literal depiction of the character. We have a more symbolic depiction of the character. The colors are more like jewel tones. They're very rich as opposed to that strong black and white context. Um, it's more of like an old school type of illustration. The typography is, I believe it's called disjoint. It's something that gets used in a lot of literary speculative fiction, like Emily St. John's books use it all the time. Um, and yeah, it's still got the sword on it, so you can still tell it's a fantasy book. And it's still going to appeal to people who want to see a girl with a sword, but it's not reading like sort of trashy, disposable commercial fiction. Now, I haven't read this. I have no idea whether I would like it or not. I'm guessing not, but it is definitely trying to appeal to a very, very different audience through these different elements. So genre is probably the most important thing that you can communicate, which is like what kind of book it is. And you want to be able to tell the genre at a glance. That doesn't mean that you can't put your own twist on it, especially if you're doing crossover work. But it should at least be recognizable in its genre and in its subgenre. And like I said, this is a balance. So your balance is between original and cliche. You want to stand out, but you want to fit in. And I would always say you do want to err on the side of cliche rather than confuse your audience, especially if you're just starting out. Oh, do I take my own advice? No, of course not. Like my book covers are completely weird, but but I know that, I don't have a wide appeal. So book designers are going to use these tools, imagery, typography, color scheme, to indicate that genre. So on the right-hand side is one of my hobbies, which is redesigning book covers of famous books to be in the wrong genre. And I have a newsletter where I put these things out every month.
I just need to say these are hysterical and I have to join your newsletter.
Yeah, it's nightbeatseu.ca. It's a lot of fun. The latest one was Charlie and the Chocolate Factory as a workplace safety manual, which was just perfect. Um, so again, same book, two covers, and the difference is who the audience is. So are you writing for children or adults? Unfortunately, we have to acknowledge gender bias in marketing. Are you going for more of a literary or commercial market? And a book can have multiple audiences, but a cover needs to appeal to one audience in particular. So, as a cover designer, I say everybody should do alternate covers and do as many covers as they like and hire me to do them. Um, but you'll see it a lot. Like the more popular a book gets, the more covers you're going to get for it, and especially if you go international. So here we have on the top a version of The Hobbit for its original intended audience, which is children. And they're going to see a big, colorful dragon and they're going to be like, yeah, I want to read that. And when I was a little kid, I would see something like that and go, yeah, I totally want to read that. The audience for the one at the bottom, I find this interesting. There's no dragon, there's no hobbit, there's no indication that it's even fantasy other than it has like a little bit of like a old-timey feel to it. The audience for this is adults who read The Hobbit as a kid and loved it, and now they want an edition of it that's not kind of embarrassing, looks like a kid's book. Maybe they can read it on the subway. It's also going to sell a lot of books, but that's not, that was never like the original market for this. Okay, so images. So when we think about a cover, the first thing we think about is the image. Probably have an image in our head of our story and the critical scenes and what the characters look like. But your choice of what kind of image is going to make a massive difference in terms of what it's communicating. So whether it's a photo or an illustration, if it's an illustration, whether that's a more abstracted image or a more representational image. Of course, it should contain some kind of information about what the book is about. This might be like a symbol or character art. But that style is what is actually doing most of the heavy lifting in terms of genre and audience. So illustration is always the most expensive and thus the most preferred option. The more custom it is, the more expensive it gets. You can do like hand-drawn, painted, or digital. In general, there's kind of like a curve. So if it's very, very cartoony, it will tend to be perceived as children or middle grade. As it gets more realistic, you're getting into YA and commercial fiction. And then on the other end of the realism scale, if it's beginning to be more abstract, you're looking at sort of an adult and literary audience. The one exception that I'm seeing is that increasingly YA books are looking a little bit more like literary adult fiction. And I think that is just because the audience for YA isn't really kids anymore. It's like adults who like YA writing. Public domain illustration is public and free to use. I don't know why designers don't use it more. If it's been 75 years since the death of the author, you can use it on your book cover. There's also, of course, stock illustration websites that have free or licensable illustrations. I think you kind of have to communicate this, or you have to use it in interesting ways, but you can use it. Photography, again, you can do custom photography, which will be more expensive. Buy something from a cheaper stock photography site like Deposit Photos, or use free stock images, with the caveat that if you're using free stock images, so is everybody else. You can use the original image or digitally alter it. This does tend to read as nonfiction. So if you're going for something that is more genre, you want to be doing something really interesting with it. So, as an example, the cover of Never Let Me Go is really, really zooming in on photo to the point where it doesn't really feel like a photo anymore. It feels more like a painting. There's also some like interesting things happening with the color correction in the image. And so it feels like intimate and creepy and kind of gives the right vibes for the book. Digital illustration is where most of us probably end up, myself included. So this can be 2D or 3D. It also includes everything from photo montage, Photoshop, to 3D modeling software. This is really going to read as commercial fiction and YA. And you can both buy pre-made covers or you can commission one of the many, many illustrators out there who are happy to do digital illustration for you. See, I gotta include this, which is AI is an option that you should never use. This is for both the sake of your career, the industry, the future of humanity, and the planet. Everybody can tell you will go viral for the wrong reasons. Typography, I would say, is the most important part of the cover, but that's because I'm a type nerd. This is going to communicate genre and audience in a way that is a lot more subtle than the image will, but it still counts. So it needs to be readable at a small size. Again, you can break the rule if you're famous or if you've got a really good marketing department behind you. One of the things that I see a lot in amateur cover design is that they have a cool image and then they've just slapped the text on, and they haven't really thought about how the text and the image relate. When they relate, that is the sign of kind of a professional cover. And it's these subtle details that will make a huge difference. So if you look at the C, R, and O in The Curious Rise of Alex Lazarus, it's a really boring font, but it's just slightly off enough to give you that sense of like unbalance. And so you see that first, and then you see the little guy trying to hold everything together. So even with something that's pretty simple, you can get some really clever results. Most book sales are online. I'm a fan of those old school oil paintings that used to be on really pulpy covers. And oh, bye, Mike. So because we don't really browse bookstores anymore, everything has to work thumbnail. And that means really big, really bold typography. So again, all of the same books. I love the new cover. I think it's really cool, but it's definitely got like a different character to it than the ones that were made for finding in bookstores. A big clue to amateur cover design is when you'll see like the type either pushed to the top or pushed to the bottom or both, because somebody has commissioned a really nice illustration and they don't want to cover the image. But you can see, even with these really beautiful old school illustrations, they haven't been afraid to have the type overlapping the image and be really big and really in your face. Color is going to give a lot of clues as to genre and mood. In general, the more colorful a book is, the more it's going to be geared towards a younger audience, and the more restrained the color palette is, the more it's going to be geared towards an older audience. That is starting to change. I'm going to talk about trends in a little bit. As well, colors will have different psychological associations. So, you know, if you're doing something that is more geared at women, there's still a lot of pink. If you're doing something that is very like sci-fi in the future, it's probably going to be like in the blue, green, gray tones. I don't make the rules. You should be aware of cliches. You don't need to be aware. You don't need to be afraid of cliches. You just want to make sure that you're not using a cliche that is now going to make you look dated. So that historical fiction kind of cliche where there's the back of a woman's head and she's looking at a thing, that's kind of over. You still see it, but it looks cheesy. When you're aware of the trend is also probably cliche. So the latest trend is Sinsel, you know, it's everywhere. I like it, but it is one to watch. So a couple trends in the last couple years. I mentioned that usually something very colorful is going to skew younger. In the kind of more literary end of things, you're starting to see these really hyper saturated psychedelic covers, which I think is really cool. I really like it. It appeals to my child brain. So we'll see how long that one lasts. Florals have kind of always gone strong, especially in the more romantic end of things, because you can imply sex without having, you know, a bodice rippery kind of cover or like one of those photoshopped shirtless men. Um, Type forward design. So this has been a thing in the more literary world for a really long time. Genre is sort of catching up. So you're starting to see something where the font is the main part of the book, and you might have like smaller images that are incorporated into the font. And then collage. So something that I'm surprised that we haven't seen more of, just because it's kind of easy to do on a budget and looks pretty effective. there's a lot of collage covers. And you can see that similar font to the Sarah Jane Maas one that I showed you earlier. Okay. So, I don't think that everybody needs to become an expert in cover design. Like I said, I don't recommend people do their own covers. But you can learn a lot by looking at both people who are doing it well and people who are doing a lot of mistakes. So a couple of sources that I love, Catherine Rosa Miller is a book designer, and she does a lot of like, I hated this cover, but I love the book. So now I'm going to redesign it the way I would. And she takes you through her process step by step from her rough sketches to her variations to her final thing. And I really like her rationales, even when I don't necessarily agree with what her final piece looks like. It's pretty cool. Cover Critics is the one that I mentioned earlier. It's a crowdsourced book critique forum. It's pretty brutal. So people will put up their covers and then everybody can comment on them and make fun of them. The reason why I don't like them very much anymore is that they've really bought into the AI thing. And so a lot of their suggestions will be like, oh, I whipped this up in Midjourney. And I'm like, oh, you should be embarrassed to say that in public on the internet. Come on. Um, it's, I think it's useful to figure out what people have done wrong, though. And so I find a lot of their comments kind of interesting. And then my favorite book blogger is It's Divya, who's a YouTuber. And one of the things that she does on her channel is she does the activity that I do, where she'll take a genre and do a book that uses all of those genre cliches visually. And she's very funny. So yeah, so she's worth following as well. Okay. And I think I am at my half hour. So let's talk.
So we can just jump in at this moment
Yeah.
for okay. Thank you, Rachel, for sharing. This has been wonderful and very helpful. One thing I wanted to know about, I work in epic fantasy, which means a lot of digital illustrated covers, usually with their back, because I don't know, it's easier than painting the front. But I did hire a wonderful painter who's painting a full body in environment, front facing character. What I'm wondering about is I want her to feel free as an artist to explore and create, but also I don't want to give her so much direction that it breaks her inside and it doesn't make her want to do it. What advice would you give for directing artists in a way that is both helpful and allows them to soar a little bit?
Yeah. Oh, that is a great question. Is she also doing the design or just doing the illustration?
She's just doing the design. This is part of an ongoing series, so I kind of already have the template, the font, the way it's treated, kind of already worked out.
Perfect. So have you given her that?
She's seen my previous books, so I'm hoping that she realizes that's where it's going.
Yeah, I would say I'm not primarily an illustrator. I'm much more of a graphic designer. So, but that would be my first question is what other elements need to be on the cover?
Yeah.
Because you don't want your illustration. Like I've seen a lot of really beautiful digital illustrations where they've done it with a wrap in mind. So some of the most interesting things are happening where the back cover is going to be. And not thinking like, oh, this isn't likely to be sold primarily in a bookstore facing out. This is going to be on Amazon. So I would sort of start with those practicalities. But in terms of like her vision, I'd have a good look at her portfolio and make sure that that aligns with what you envision. I know I worked with one illustrator on a different project. It wasn't a book cover, but I had sort of this idea of like airbrushed vans from the 70s and like that color scheme and that vibe, not even realizing that this illustrator was quite a bit younger than me and didn't have that visual reference. So, like, just stylistically, even though he was like super talented, there was just a lot of back and forth where I'm like, no, it shouldn't look cute. It shouldn't look like, cartoony. It should look like cheesy. Um, so I would say, like, starting off with some of the visual inspiration, that would be really important from her perspective. And then I would say, like, also think about the hills that you're going to die on. So the famous story is, Ursula Le Guin, Wizard of Earthsea, and nearly every cover for that book had the main character as white. And she didn't have a lot of power, even as an author at the time, the major publisher, to say that, like, no. um, so you want to think about, like, if this illustrator does an interpretation of the character or the scene that's very different from what you have in mind, but might be more marketable. What are the things that are really, really important, and communicate that right from the beginning? I don't know if that answers your question.
No, that's very helpful. Thank you.
So one question I have, since I've been around for a long time, is covers change. I mean, I liked how you showed some of the older covers and what they do, and I liked your rationale. I hadn't thought about, when you're older, you might not want the children's cover around, because I don't feel like that. It's like that would never occur to me. I would just assume everyone got it and read it when they were a kid. But in terms of, like, as indie authors, if we want to get up off the everybody's doing it and push it a little into the future, so maybe, oh, people are going to want to imitate us, what do you advise for that? I mean, like, just hire the right designer, or give the right designer notes, or be willing to
Yeah.
sweat a
I
little when you release it.
Yeah, I like, it depends. Like, if you're trying to just make as much money as possible, you are going to end up chasing trends. But I'll give you an example of one that I worked on. I can pull it off the shelf here. So this one, hopefully you guys can all see that, right? It's a big hefty chunker. It was really, really fun to work on. And it was a book where I felt that the cliches of the genre didn't fit particularly. So it's highly experimental. It's uses like a conlang. It's quite a bit longer than is even common in epic fantasy. And the author was pretty um adamant about, like, he didn't want character art on the cover. He didn't want a literal depiction of the characters. And I think he was right about that, even though maybe that would have sold better. Just because I think it might have sold, but I think that people would have been disappointed with the type of book that it was, which is weird. And it was like a unique thing that needed a unique cover. And so when I was working on it, I was pulling from a lot of references that were not, like, I didn't do a grid of 9. I did do a grid. But it included, like, wooden books from, like, the 1600s. So I was kind of pulling influences from not so traditional places. And I was chasing a bit of a trend, which is the sort of 3D modeled abstract covers that you see occasionally. I think, like, Lee Bardugo was one of the ones that I used. I ended up teaching myself Blender in order to sculpt the figures on the cover. So, you'll get these books that just sort of don't fit in the standard genre categories. And so using those sort of standard genre shorthands on the cover might sell a lot in the short term, but long term, you're sending the wrong signal to the readers. And in that case, I would say, maybe instead of doing a 9 grid, you're doing like a Pinterest board with all of your potential visual inspirations and kind of going from there. With the caveat that, like, the more commercial a thing is, the more likely it is to make you a lot of money. If you don't care about that as much, then you're a little bit freer to be more experimental. Like, I knew my book wasn't going to sell like tens of thousands of copies, which is why I think you can tell it's a fantasy, but it's I don't know. It's less readily identifiable. The second one is a lot more readily identifiable as a fantasy.
Ellen has a really good question she put in the
Oh,
chat. What
okay.
makes a font say science fiction or space opera? I hear this all the time. People are always trying to figure out how to define that with their cover. So but Ellen is asking specifically about fonts, but
Yeah.
you could go further if you want.
Yeah, for sure. The biggest distinction is serif versus sans serif. So just really briefly, if you look at like the fonts that are on the screen, and they have little dingies at the top and bottom of each letter. Oops, that was my credits. Those are called serifs. And if you've got them, it's going to read more as fantasy. And if you don't got them, it's going to read more as sci-fi. You'll have some fonts that are sort of, again, if you start to break it down by subgenre, you will have some fonts that look like old school computer fonts from the 80s. And these are going to read more as cyberpunk. If you're doing space opera, you'll generally see white font, a little bit of what's called kerning, which is your spaces between letters, and a glow effect. At least that's how I do space opera. I do a lot of space opera. That seems to be the dominant style right now. So it's really like, it's just a matter of when you're looking at your comps, looking at what the dominant font is and kind of going for that. Usually there's a little bit of wiggle room depending on your subgenre. And I've seen a bunch of fantasies lately that have been using sans serif fonts, which is kind of interesting. Tends to be the more like crossover type books that do that. I used a sans serif font for my fantasy. Again, as I was trying to signal that it wasn't a traditional fantasy. Yeah. Oh, I see the follow-up is yeah, the heavy military style. I think you can make a font like that not look like that. I'm thinking particularly of like some of Adrian Tchaikovsky's stuff where it's like a sans serif font, but it's a little bit like thinner and more delicate, and it looks like future without looking like military sci-fi. Yeah, perfect. Both versions of the cover that I've seen have that. Yeah. And I like it. I think I think both of the covers really tell you what kind of book it is, which is nice. And they're invoking like space and the future without, you know, again, misleading the reader that it's military sci-fi.
Yeah, I would imagine that would be a bad thing to imply it's military sci-fi when it's not, because that's quite a rabid fan group.
Yeah. Yeah, and they'll destroy you on Goodreads
There's no military in this.
and Reddit and yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it too is you always have to remember that while you are the client, you're not the audience. You're not who it's for. And I always want my authors to be happy with the covers that I create for them. But I do want to balance this with this is for the reader. Like this is to build reader expectations. This is to appeal to the reader. This is not for you. And I'm always happy to, make people images that are for them. But it's a marketing tool.
I
So
think it's easier to do market testing now.
yeah.
Do you find that you have clients who are interested in that?
No, most of my clients can't afford that. I'm really doing a lot of like indie and small press work. I do have one client who commissions repeat alternate covers for the same book and does testing to see which one does best. And I think she's generally found that they all kind of do the same.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Like I think at the level that most of my clients are at, it's not going to make a huge difference.
Once you know what your readers will go for, it's harder. But in the beginning, I mean, it's easier when you know, because all your choices are kind of going to be speaking to them. But in the beginning, you don't know. I mean, like that first cover you showed us with the, I'm trying to figure out who would have designed that for a YA book. Somebody who hated the author. I mean, yeah, that was just bizarre. I mean, I would hope that person got fired, but you never know. Um, but I could have seen, like, if you had told me that was an indie author, I would have believed it, because there would have been some story about that tree and a roof, about those leaves and a roof that made sense to the author without thinking about. And I do see that with a lot of new authors who are trying to put a whole bunch of symbolic storytelling into the cover. Um, but I think that testing has gotten a lot easier and cheaper to do. Um,
And I think that the sort of visual tropes have become a lot more codified. So that cover that I showed you is from about 20 years ago when the book came out. And there was a lot more variety in terms of what you could do and what you could get away with. And I mean, I think even with my own design practice, it's become a lot more like I'm doing this kind of book and it has to look like this. And you get a little bit of play, but back 20 years ago it was the Wild West.
but does that feel constraining, though, that you have to? I mean, to me, I wouldn't. I mean, that's the story of my books. I don't like to write the same thing over and over again. Um, as a designer, you don't ever have the urge to, paint outside the lines or anything.
Oh, I do all the time. And like I said, I do it for my own books, but that's just, I tend to work for a lot of people who aren't looking for the most commercial thing. So it does give me a little bit more scope of experimentation. I do a lot of like literary stuff, and that has a wider range of what they can look like. And I also find like, yeah, the tropes are more codified, but they're also changing a lot faster, and the software changes a lot faster. So I kind of get some of my creativity on that way. I'm like, oh, like we're not doing flowers this year. Okay, well, it's time to learn a different thing. Um, so yeah, I mean, I part of me is like, well, I wish I could be an old school oil painter and do those really gorgeous fantasy landscapes, because that's my favorite thing to look at. And I wish people went for more of a pulp style, because that's one of my favorite things to do. Um, but that'll come around again. So
I mean, that is the one thing, they do come around again.
yeah.
I like that you said in the beginning that it's okay to change your cover frequently. It doesn't mean that your cover is bad. It's just, maybe you're offering different readers a way to come into the book. I know people are so, I mean, because it can cost quite a bit of money to create a cover, and then it's a pain in the neck to re-upload it when you're an indie author. So I do like hearing from, a cover designer that you don't have to think this is the cover for the rest of your life.
No, no. And I mean, one of the activities that I do with my students is I will show them every single cover of The Lord of the Rings that I can find. From Tolkien's first covers, which he did do himself, because he was quite a good cover designer, to the most recent editions and a couple like foreign editions. And we go through them. We talk about like what was going on in the culture, who was the audience at this point in time. When the movies came out, that influenced the covers. So yeah, I mean, you can have many, many different alternate covers. That is totally acceptable. It doesn't mean that you're indecisive. It means that maybe you have a little bit more money to throw around, or you have a couple more broke artist friends who could use the commissions. Um, but I mean, like with my books, when I finish the third and final book in my trilogy, I'm planning to once again totally redesign them.
Is there a reason for that's design related or just market related?
A lot of it's that I was never totally happy with the first one. And so, the second and third one kind of have to fit with that. And there were a couple of design choices that I made 3 years ago that I wouldn't make now. And the advantage of once all three are out is I can make them look consistent and I can make them to whatever the market trends are in 2 or 3 years when the third one is done. Um, so yeah, it's mainly that, but it's also like, I get unhappy with my own art after a couple of years. I'm like, oh, I wish it looked like that instead.
So, just in terms of what indie authors can do once they have their covers, do you know of any good cover contests for, science fiction books or anything that you think get authors a little exposure for their books, whether they win or not?
Oh, no, I haven't heard of any. They should definitely do that though.
I know this a while ago. He sadly passed away a few years ago, but there was someone in the Bay Area who just loved talking about covers. He designed covers, old school cover designer, um, but moved forward into the future with digital. And he created a whole website, and he had, I think, monthly cover contests that were really just him talking about covers because he loved to talk about covers. But he did such a great job. People would, put their books in. It didn't cost anything. It was just, it wasn't like you got, a big award or anything. But it was really cool because you just saw all the different reactions to covers and all the different reasons why you might do things. I mean, I learned a lot from it, but I didn't know if there was something like that now.
Not that I've heard of, but if anybody finds out, please let me know because that would be a lot of fun.
Well, I mean, people might be doing what you're doing, which is designing, covers that would never happen. I liked the ones you showed us. Anybody have any questions? You can put them in the chat, or you can unmute. I was going to say it right, and I said it wrong. Oh my goodness. I mean, you did a really very comprehensive job. It was very amazing. Okay, so we're looking at Cascade, and you said it's a little bit different. So tell us exactly what went into designing this cover when you know the book.
Okay, so this is kind of a fun story. So what happened was I was just struggling to design it. I have no problems coming up with a million ideas for other people's books. I can read the sort of one or two chapters and know exactly what I want to do. Or I can even talk to the author and they'll say, my book is about this. I'm like, oh, I want to do this. Especially within really defined subgenres. But with my own, I'm like, well, everything's important, or I wouldn't have put it in the book. So I was like, well, I want something that captures the vibe and captures sort of the central themes and definitely reads as fantasy, but isn't going to again mislead somebody about the type of fantasy that it is. And so I came up with this really cool idea. So it's centered on like wizards working for the Canadian government. So I had this silhouette of like the Parliament buildings and then these tentacles that were sort of the shadow of it. And it was very like stylized and looked really, really cool. And I showed it to my publisher and he loved it. He's like, this is great. This is perfect. This is like iconic. And then I was doing my whole thing where I get evangelical about China Miéville's books because I really like his books. And I was like trying to find somebody a link. So I'm like searching through and, on Amazon or something like that. And I come across an edition of Kraken or Kraken. I never know how it's pronounced. And it's the same thing. It's the British Museum, and then it's got the tentacles at the bottom. And I'm like, my God, it's not even like some obscure author who's done it. It's like a really well-known author who I cite as an influence all the time. I can't do this. So I kind of came up with like, I still want to show like the Parliament buildings and like something magical. And I did a whole bunch of like swirly things going around because like that happens in the book. And just none of it was working. So I ended up like, you can sort of see there's like a photo montage. I can pull a better version of it actually. Um, Maybe. This is gonna read as a little bit dark on the screen, but there she is. Woo. So you've got kind of like the Parliament buildings and then this like overlay of magic. And yeah, the reason I'm not happy with it is because it just didn't have the kind of visual impact in print that it had, kind of when I designed it. It's just like a little, I find the colors get lost and it doesn't do like the sort of sparkle thing that I wanted it to do. The second one, I was just a lot more considered with it. But yeah, the process was essentially I came up with a perfect cover idea and then found out that somebody else had done it about 6 months before I
I'm
did.
just curious, anybody else have that happen where you had a cover and then you found out someone else had one really close? I know that happens when people use stock photos and they'll suddenly find out someone else is using the same stock photo.
Well, approximately that is that when I had my sort of Queen's cover redesigned, um, I asked the cover designer to put certain things on it, and then displayed it on social media, and people said it's a wonderful cover. One person said it looks like all the other covers in epic fantasy, and I said, and I don't know whether I said this or just thought it, but I thought that's the point. I mean, it's supposed to look like all the other covers in epic fantasy. I'll try to upload it in the chat. But yeah, I wanted the cover to look like all the other ones in epic fantasy so that people to take one look at the cover and know it was epic fantasy. That's the point.
That is very true. You actually made an interesting point that indie authors, we don't always think about or consider. I know the ones that go to, and sell a lot of paperbacks, and Joan Marie, you're one of those. So what do you do when you know that you want a certain effect on a cover, on a real book that's going to be sitting on a table that's been printed by a printer? Is there anything you design differently or think about ahead of time?
Uh, Sorry, were you asking
I'm
me?
asking Rachel. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I just meant I know Joan Marie does do
Yeah.
tables is all I meant. I'm sorry. I
Oh
didn't
yeah,
mean
yeah. No, I do. I do think about that quite a bit. So one of the things is if I know that a book is going to have a print edition, I design it from the wrap. I often do that even if the author doesn't think that there's going to be a print edition, because guaranteed they're going to change their mind on that if the book sells at, oh, I love it.
That's
Yeah,
beautiful.
yeah. I would totally say epic fantasy. Let's go. Um, yeah, so I would if I'm doing something that I know is going to be for print, I start with a wrap. If I think that there's going to be a hardcover, I sort of start with the hardcover, and because you can always make it smaller, you can always take away elements, but adding elements becomes a challenge.
We'd never have thought of that. I mean, I think a lot of indie authors go the other way, where we start with, okay, we just need to worry about this one rectangle.
No, I always start with like, is it going to be the wrap or is it going to be just the front cover? And then I've had clients say, well, just do the front cover, and then I'm going to get my friend who's good at Canva to do the rest of it. And I'm like, absolutely not, because the friend inevitably does a terrible job. But I started out. I'm old enough that I was designing for print only at a certain point in my life. And so I was always doing, and I did a lot of poetry books. So I was always doing these cool things on the spine because I knew I was working for like a medium press. Like I knew that the books weren't going to be displayed front facing out. They were like Canadian poets. They were going to be spine out. So I would do like these bright pink or bright yellow spines so that when they're in this row of like black and white spines, that's the thing that people are going to see. But I don't really do that anymore because mostly books are sold on Amazon, not in bookshops. So yeah, but like you always want to think about like who it's for, who's going to see it, where are they going to see it.
And you want to be able to, be proud of it when you're looking at it too.
Yeah, and I mean, I also like books to be a nice physical object. I don't always get that, and I am a tremendous hypocrite. I read almost everything on ebook because I just like I'm old and I like my font size to be variable. And so half the time when I'm reading something, I'm not even really aware of what the cover is, even though I'm like, oh, covers are so, so important. But
They do make a difference, though. I mean, that is how we've learned. And, I don't know whether a new generation will come up where they don't care about it. But how many of us, got most of our books from the library? Those are the ways that we found our books. I like that idea of the spine, though, like
yeah.
making the spine stand out. All right, so it's 8 o'clock, and Rachel, you've done a really great job. Does anyone have any last minute questions? I think you could unmute and say thank you and goodbye.
Yeah, thank you so much. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you. It was very helpful.
Yeah, this was
Thank
great.
you.
I love your presentation too.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always fun, and I always love talking about this stuff. And friends don't want friends to have bad covers.
That's true, but enemies might. Rivals, not enemies, rivals.
That's a different story.
Thank you very much.
All right. Have a good
All right.
night, everybody.
See you guys
Bye.
next.